What is good, everyone? Welcome to the channel. My name is Paul and I make videos about Japanese society, life, and culture from the viewpoint of a long-term foreign resident. I've been in Japan for 18 years, and if you're doing the math from the thumbnail or the title of this video, you'd be like, wait, he says over 20 years. That's because I first came in 2002, lived in Yamanashi Prefecture at the foot of Mount Fuji for 3 years, and then went back to the States for grad school, moving back to Japan in 2008, and I've been here for 15 years since then. And that's where I'm getting today's topic idea, which is how has Japan changed in that over 20 years from when I first came? Let's get started. So I've got 5 items for you to discuss today, plus one honorable mention. And the first big change is you. All y'all. Anyone watching this video who has an interest in Japan, you want to travel here, you live here now, basically foreign tourists and foreign residents, you have increased so much. There are so many more tourists and residents since I first got here. And of course there's good and bad to that. I mean, it's a great thing for the economy. Japan's economy has been very stagnant since the bubble burst in the late 80s, early 90s. And as such, this new booming tourist economy is of great help to Japan and Japanese people and businesses. There are some negatives, of course. There's lots of crowding, like Kyoto is really crowded these days. And I made a video about that if you want to watch how to deal with Kyoto and not have crowds at all. I made a video about that. I'll put a link in the description below. But basically, that's been a big issue with having more foreigners here. And a coworker of mine who lives in the Shibuya area said that it's almost like living in a theme park these days, because half the people on the trains and in the Shibuya crossing are foreign tourists. And for me, when I go back to my hometown out in the countryside, it's very pronounced because I'm treated like a tourist now. When I used to live there, people would talk to me in Japanese, they'd have conversations with me, you know, where are you from? Why are you in Japan? What do you like about Japan? That sort of thing. And that doesn't happen anymore because it's just chock full of other foreign looking faces, and so everyone's treated just like an ordinary tourist. In terms of foreign residents, it's pretty much a good thing because now you have more diversity and you have, you know, some different types of restaurants that are opening up. You have more Thai and Vietnamese restaurants, for instance. And if you go into convenience stores in Tokyo, Yokohama, you might find a person from Nepal behind the counter, or a Vietnamese person, etc. So that's not a bad thing. And you know, Japan famously has a falling birth rate, but the one birth rate that is increasing is half kids, half Japanese and half something else. So that's certainly a difference, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's certainly also good for Japan, you know, continuing a consumer base and having at least one part of the country's demographic growing. So the second thing that has really changed in the past 20 years is Japan's elderly society. You know, the famous Japan is becoming more elderly, falling birth rate, less young people, more old people, is really becoming more and more visible. Whether you live here or you are a tourist, you need to make peace with the fact that some things are going to be slower. You're going to be behind someone in the shops who is elderly and they're fumbling to get exact change in 1 yen coins, or they don't know how to use the self-automated system. There's going to be more drivers on the road who are driving 10 kilometers under the speed limit. You're going to be stuck behind people on sidewalks who are walking very slowly because they're elderly. And that's going to get worse before it gets better. So if you are very much irritated by those kinds of things, then you probably don't want to live here, and you know, just kind of deal with it when you're here as a tourist. But yes, Japan's aging society is becoming more and more apparent, especially if you go out into the countryside. If you're hanging out in Shinjuku or Shibuya in Tokyo, yeah, not so much, but plenty of places in Tokyo and Yokohama you'll see this as well. Now, one thing that's important to note about this changing demographic is with less younger people, there are less people to work in stores. So absolutely you see more and more cashless payments and more self-serve kiosks in convenience stores, shops, etc. And it's just simply because there's not enough staff that can be hired. There's not enough people to cover these positions. That's one of the reasons why you have the Vietnamese person or the Nepali behind the register in a convenience store. And it's not going to get any better anytime soon. Now, if you like cashless payments and you don't want to deal with, staff, and you want to do everything basically automatically, then Japan is definitely getting better. It was actually one of those culture shocks that I had when I first came to Japan, that there were still full service gas stations. In my hometown in 2002, you would have to hunt for a full service gas station. Everything was self-serve. They're all self-serve now, but so is a lot of other things like convenience stores. There's conveyor belt sushi places that you go in, you get a number for your table, and that number will also be your checkout for when you leave. You order everything from a tablet, and then when you go to the front desk, you scan your number and you pay at a kiosk. You've done an entire meal without talking to any member of staff, and that's only going to increase. In Europe or America, you might complain about, it's just greedy corporations cutting salaries, so it's going automated at the expense of people's jobs. In Japan, there's probably an element of that, but it's also a big element of there's just not enough people to cover these positions, and Japan is not a land of mass immigration, so we're not getting people that way to take over these types of jobs either. Another divide between the elderly and the younger generations is the media landscape. Now, this one can certainly apply to a lot of different places in the world, not just Japan. But when I was here in 2002 to 2005, and to some extent from 2008 to like the early 2011-12, I could go to school and talk to my coworkers and my students about things that were on TV, and everyone could relate to the same things. Everyone was watching the same programs. Everyone was, listening to the same pop music, etc., etc. Now, my university students don't even own TVs. It's just smartphones or tablets, maybe a PC, but even that's not so common. Everyone is using pretty much smartphones to watch Amazon, Hulu, Netflix, YouTube, etc. So the generation that still watches TV, and it's very, very prevalent in Japan. It's actually pretty common for Japanese families to have watched TV during dinner together, where in my house it was always dinner time is family time. There's no watching of TV then. But in Japan, watching TV was pretty ubiquitous, and that's just completely changing. And so there's a kind of a sense of shared culture that is dying or doesn't really exist anymore. Now, here's my honorable mention, which is there is a lot more English, which is another benefit of the tourist boom. Having so many more tourists and foreign residents, English has become much more common on signage. It's become much more common in terms of websites with available information for tourists. And honestly, I think a reason why there are so many more tourists in Japan now is because of the smartphone revolution. I think Japan used to be a little bit intimidating in terms of a place to get around before you had just internet in your pocket, and so people had more trepidation about traveling to Japan and dealing with the language barrier, etc. But not only has smartphones made it easier, I'm going to take the maybe somewhat controversial take that English is better here. Not just beyond the signage and the websites, but actually people. Certainly in Tokyo, Yokohama, I feel that there's more English speakers. And in my experience as an educator, I have seen students get better and better. And I actually know that in part is because the education system at the earlier levels, elementary school, junior high school, etc., has definitely gotten better. So if you are on the train and you're talking with your friends, you're here as a tourist or whatever, if you are having a conversation loudly about Japan, Japanese people, the culture or something, just be aware there's probably several stealth English speakers close by who can understand what you're saying. Now, the last big difference I'm going to talk about, it's kind of a left turn from the ones I've been talking about already. It's less serious than the ones that I brought up, but fitness has become much more of a thing in Japan. There are more gyms, more people go to gyms, more people are running. I've been running as a hobby since around 2010, and there's way more people on the streets running and doing the same now than back then. And I've watched it increase over the years, not only on the streets around me, but also in terms of the number of events that are available and the number of people who are signing up for 10Ks, half marathons, full marathons, ultra marathons. The Fujisan race, where people run up Mount Fuji, has gotten bigger and bigger. So not only that fitness though, but also gym fitness, as I mentioned. And I think a big part of that is the gram. Having a really good looking physique on Instagram has become more and more of a thing, especially for guys. I think when I first came, there was definitely a skinny, thin guy aesthetic that girls were into, and that's changed to a more physically fit aesthetic that's become popular. And as a result, you see a lot more guys in the gym trying their best to get that body, especially for beach, summertime beach. I guess you could say the days of skinny fat are gone. Rather, the days when people could just rely on their kind of naturally slim, slender Asian physique and not worry about having musculature over that. Just, a soft layer of pudge, but they were naturally thin, so it didn't really show. Yeah, not so much anymore. Now people want to get in shape and be fit. Okay, do you live in Japan? Do you have things that you've really noticed have changed in your time here? Let us know in the comments below. Also, please comment on the things I've talked about, whether you agree or disagree, or anything that surprised you. Please join the conversation. At any rate, I want to thank you very much for watching this particular video of mine. Please check out my other content. Thank you so much. I'll catch you next time. Peace.